Namaste and welcome to this Wednesday 10 p.m. show. And Wednesday 10 p.m., of course, we are featuring Shri Vibhuti Jha. And with him today, we have got Dr. Ajay Chrungoo. And of course, our Jaipur Dialogues viewers, he's a regular appearance. But the Wednesday night show is very popular in the USA. You might not have seen Dr. Ajay Chrungoo earlier. Let me introduce him to you. He is, of course, a doctor. What should I say? A displaced Kashmiri, and who just escaped genocide, now settled in Jammu. And he is also the president of Panoon Kashmir, that movement seeking to have a Kashmiri homeland within the Kashmir Valley. Welcome, Vibhuti ji, and welcome, Dr. Chrungoo.
Thank you.
Straight into this topic. This is something that we have been discussing for the US audiences and the combined Indian audiences for some time with Vibhuti ji. And we call it not Hindu phobia, but Hindumisia, because phobia is irrational fear. And Misia is actually hate. So the Hindu hate is very much prevalent in the West, particularly in the US, especially in the academia, and even in certain other aspects. So my proposal today, and I will start with Dr. Chrungoo. My proposal today is that this whole business of Hindumisia, it starts with our own self-loathing. Before we go and blame the West for it, I think we need to look inwards and our own self-loathing, of which genocide denial of the Hindus is a very, very prominent feature. And this genocide denial extends to over 1,000 years. And if we take Will Durant's figures, it actually extends to almost 80 million Hindus, of which the Kashmiri genocide is a very, very prominent part. And even now, we are seeing this happen in Bengal. So this is my proposition for today, Dr. Chrungoo. I'm not able to hear you. No, your voice is not coming through. Your voice is not coming through. I think we can hear other things, but we can't hear your voice. I think maybe something wrong with the mic. Okay, so let's put this whole thought into perspective, Vibhuti ji. Do you agree with the way I have constructed the proposition?
Yes, you have. You always do. So you are very polite in asking me if you have. So I congratulate you for being so.
Well, that's a left-handed compliment.
No, this is a straight-handed compliment. No, there is no mincing of words because it's important. And today I took a chance to look up the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide by the United Nations. All right, Article 2 of that. And it says here, and I want to read it so that people know exactly what it is. In the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. 1. Killing members of the group. 2. Causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and lastly, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. So if you look at these 5 parameters alone set by the United Nations, we know that it all happened in some measure in Jammu and Kashmir, Ladakh area, especially on the Kashmiri pundits. It all happened without any equivocation on that account. So when the people of Kashmir had heard, convert, leave or die, that also falls in this parameter of declaration of genocide. But I must say this one thing true. I'm a very optimistic guy, and I believe I'm an incorrigible optimist. And I believe that there is a goodness in human being that transforms to dharma winning over adharma at some point in time. But yesterday I watched your show with Ankur Sharma ji from Jammu, and that was a remarkable show in the sense that it reminded me of a conversation that I had in which Sharma ji had said that there is a complete bureaucratic and systemic invasion of the American Indian body politic, which prevents the system to rise to the occasion. The people are so dominated by that. So 2 elements to stand out. One is that a friend of mine, for the sake of confidentiality, I'll just call him Javed Bhai, who his inimical style had told me 12 years ago or so, कि झा साहब, चाहे मूर्ति हो, मुदलियार हो, मिश्रा हो, मंडल हो, मात्रे हो, सिंह और शर्मा हो, आप सब के सब अपनी सरकार बनाएंगे, लेकिन सरकार चलाएंगे हम. आप सब जो है इकट्ठे हमें कंसेशंस देंगे हमारे वोटों के लिए, और हम वो कंसेशन लेंगे और ऊपर से ज्यादा और भी ज्यादा कंसेशन लेते रहेंगे, क्योंकि आप सब हमारे वोट के लिए भागते रहेंगे. This was something which was told to me about 12 years ago. That something echoed with me when I heard Mr. Sharma yesterday, that somewhere along the line, in the Indian system during my time, when I was studying in Ferguson and Gokhale Institute, it was reckoned to be fashionable to be a Marxist. It was fashionable to be communist. It was fashionable to becoming, abuse freedoms, challenge the system. And that's what, through Bollywood and other movie creations, had seeped into our body politic. And as a result of which, we ourselves, and you said it very correctly, before we blame the West, we have to take account of that scenario. And therefore, there was another mention by Mr. Sharma, which is again my pet theme, is that implementation of plans and actions suffers in India because of varieties of factors. And one of them is, you were part of, was the bureaucracy. So think about it. When the IS officer goes to become an IS officer, a student, what does he study? He studies the UPSC laid down syllabus, in which was dominated by the Guhas and Guhas, Thappars, Habibs of the world, and there was a distaste hit put through the Hindu majority. The customs traditions were looked down upon. And as you very rightly had said once in this particular program, that the bureaucracy's job is to maintain the status quo. They are not the change agent. The bureaucracy's job is to maintain the status quo, maintain law and order, allow things to happen the way it ought to remain, as is. As a result of which, what we saw, the Babugiri, which we saw in recent past, you did a brilliant show on an IS officer beating up a person on the road, was reminiscent of British era. Today's bureaucrat, today's administration has to be development oriented. That never came about. So what we are talking about here is a very serious proposition, that if we do not, a Kashmiri Pandit genocide was not recognized by the Indian government itself, despite these United Nations Charter clearly saying so, because there was ethnic cleansing, there was conversion, there was threat to leave or die. If this kind of an environment, if we do not ourselves do something about it, as much as the Kashmiri Pandits shout to United Nations and various bodies, nobody is going to accept it because your own government is not accepting it. So that's where lies the challenge within our own system, that we have to become more aware and awakened about what's going on. There has to be, look at the numbers. I mean, it is mind-boggling that, in 1971, there was Hindu genocide in West Bengal, in Bangladesh, which is now, right? Women were raped, children were murdered, 10 millions of them. The numbers are absolutely mind-boggling, but that's not recognized. We have not ever made it as a genocide. We called it a refugee problem, which brought Indira Gandhi to the United States to stop that. And United States poo-pooed her claim at that point in time. Churchill, for example, the much touted hero of England, his actions were responsible for death of 6 to 7 million people in India in the famine-related issues. We know Noakhali, where butchering, killing, conversion happened rampantly. So if we are not recognizing our own cases of genocide, then we must learn the lesson from the world around us, that how Jews converted that into a Holocaust and made it recognized as a genocide. And that's what is the challenge that we face. We need internal reconfiguration of our mind, body, and soul in thinking as to what is happening to Hindus. And that's where the Hindumisia comes in. The hatred for Hindus exists because we are the people, somewhere along the line, we survived. We always talk about कि हम हजारों साल के सह के भी बच गए, हम इतने सारे civilizations निकल गए, लेकिन we are still around. And that's what I say, that 1.3 billion Hindus will not vaporize or die overnight. But the decolonization, balkanization of India is happening through Ghazwa-e Hind and whatever else is being talked about. It's not unreal. It's quite real, because I say I just want to say
Ghazwa-e
this
Hind is the counter to Ghazwa-e Hind.
Counter to the word. My apologies. I said Ghazwa-e Hind. Now, what I'm trying to say here is that something very clearly, that the enemies are using the democratic process and the tools to unseat us, and we are not taking cognizance of that fact. Tomorrow, if evil elements in India, in the name of suffering and victimization by majority Hindutva ideas, if they declare a particular region as their own country, there will be 50 countries to recognize them, including our neighbors. So we are facing an existential threat. We are hated. We are disliked for the simple reason that we can survive if only we tighten our belt and jump into the field.
Okay, so can we have Dr. Chrungoo now? Is here?
Yes. I hope my voice is
Yes,
okay.
Yes. We can hear you. Only you are not centered. Can you just center yourself?
I can center. Okay.
Yes.
Okay?
It's fine. It's fine. So you heard, Dr. Chrungoo, you heard Vibhuti Jhaji, and you might have heard Ankur Sharma yesterday. And I'm making a larger case. And it's not just confined to the genocide of Kashmiri Pandits, but a millennium-long genocide. And my case is that it is this genocide, instead of producing any sympathy for us, or instead of consolidating our cause, instead of consolidating our own identity, it is only producing Hindumisia or Hindu hatred in the West. What an irony.
You see, two things are very important to, I think, to appreciate in this context. One thing which has to be appreciated is that there is a fundamental difference in the quality of consciousness of an inclusive society and consciousness of a society which is ultimately driven by totalitarian religious and political cultures. The sensitivities are different, the orientation is different, the reference frame is different. So for an inclusive society, for an inclusive culture, to understand a totalitarian assault is very difficult. For an inclusive culture to understand an irrational war is also very, very difficult to understand. Because the evolution of sensitivities and the intellectual processes is entirely in different directions. West has been the part of that religio-political cultural process, which for a long time was totalitarian. Even which, when it started flirting with the ideas of inclusiveness and democracy, remained imperialist and colonialist for a long, long time. And its consciousness was at peace because its orientation and its evolution was totalitarian. On the other side, Hindu consciousness for a millennia, it received the assaults, the most brutal assaults in the history of world, assaults which were of genocidal nature. But it could not transform the essential quality of the consciousness, the inclusive consciousness, where irrational war could not fit into the rationality of the mind, where whole hog destruction of societies, cultures, ethnicities, nations, it was incomprehensible. So at a very consciousness plane, at the quality of the consciousness planes, we had a problem. The second problem which we had was that the very brutality of the war for 1 millennium, it must have created a numbness. You see, in our college days, when we used to do the experimentation of biology, and we used to go to the laboratory, and they would tell us that you have to do some experimentation with the frogs. The frog was held by its legs, and then with a stick we will hammer it on its head, which was called as stunning. And the next step was pithing, that you put a needle into the spinal cord and destroy the spinal cord. This numbing, or this ultimately becoming almost a vegetable, it was a result of a very fundamental violence which was inflicted on the frog. For 1,000 years, the type of destruction to which India has been subjected and Hindus have been subjected, it has not been able to destroy the spinal cord, but it has created a sort of an anesthesia, or a sort of an escape, that we want to avoid the recognition of the fact that we are facing with a process of violence which is entirely different than our civilizational experience. And that withdrawal, that escape, or that anesthesia has ultimately led to us not responding to it, not trying to understand it. Because it's very unusual trying to think that you have to understand the insanity. You have to understand the madness. For a civilization which was far ahead of its counterparts in the rest of the world, for them trying to comprehend insanity, trying to comprehend the extremes of brutality, it did not fall within the rational frame of mind. And that's perhaps what has happened to India. There is one more thing, perhaps the defeat, the sense of defeat, the sense of destruction which took place. With regard to West, there has been this talk that the Islam could enter into Europe because Europe at that time was in the Dark Ages. And they said that the barbarians had created the Dark Ages. It had relapsed into economic this decline to the extent that they could not fight the war with the Islam once the Islamic invasions took place. But in recent times, the researchers have found that the Dark Ages had not come because the barbarians had shifted or moved from Germany and tried to attack the rest of the European countries and brought them down to a state of what you call as decline. But the darkness had taken place because the Islamic armies had drowned hundreds of the vessels, trading vessels, and the research on the floor bed of Mediterranean. And once they tried to correlate it, they found that that the trade across the Mediterranean was destroyed. It was destroyed by the Muslims. And perhaps the dark ages, the decline had also happened because the trading process with Europe, it had declined to a greater extent. And the surprise was that why did it happen that even after having an ascendance globally, the Western world, their historians and their analysts, they tried to undermine it, they tried to distort it, they tried to deny this reality. And there are many who say that it was the fright of the destruction. It was the impact of the destruction, which some people say the imposition of, they call it as an imposition of the Islamic will. That they were thinking that if they really face the reality, it is going to cause a bigger problem. So massive destructions across the continents against the civilizations, relentless and prolonged destruction sometimes create this process that you start denying, you start closing your eyes, you start acting as ostriches, and you think that by trying to postpone the conclusions, you are actually winning the war. To some extent, it might have happened in India also. But I'll just want to tell you, just to come to the focus at this time, is that you have an example of 47. 1947 partition of India took place. It had many lessons. Just before the partition, there was a great famine of Bengal, and you could see that millions died. But one of the foremost intellectuals and statesmen of the world, Winston Churchill, he could overlook it. He was ready to allow millions of people to perish only to see that the trade or the economic interests of Britain are going to be protected. And when the partition plan was conceived, it was a plan on the throes of genocide, very thinking that we will expunge out a part of the Bharat Varsha or India. It was basically saying that we are going to unleash a genocide to create two countries, only to preserve, only to protect the strategic interests. And the genocide was not of a few thousand people or a few lakh people. The implication was millions of people will die only to protect the geopolitical interests. So we had a part of the civilization, a part of the, say, the superpower United Kingdom, who was ready to inflict it. On the other side, we had the political class in India, the Muslim League, which was ready to inflict it to get Pakistan, and the Congress ready to allow it to get whatever could be got after a truncated India. Now, the moment you see this reality, you understand to what extent the human mind can ultimately go down, to what extent of evil, if it can be called as evil. Congress leaders knew what partition meant. Jinnah also knew what partition meant. Both the sides knew that it will unleash colossal destruction. Both the sides were ready for that destruction. And both the sides want the matters to be settled through this colossal destruction. And once it happened, both the sides were ready to fudge it. So what happened in 1947 was not only the genocidal intentions of the British to ultimately destroy a civilization. It was also the very, you can call, malignant interests which were being followed, even at the cost of unleashing genocides by the political class of India at that time. On one side, Muslim League, on the other side, the Congress. So they were preparing for the transition, and they were ready to allow that transition if millions of people die. And that happened. And what happened after that? A Pakistan was created. I call Pakistan as a genocidal state. Pakistan is not a normal state. It is a state which was created out of a genocide. And it is a state which is ultimately nourished on the concepts of genocide. And that's why Pakistan, over the years, it became a Pakistan where only genocides could happen. They unleashed genocides on the minorities there, 23 to 27% population. So the moderate estimates are 23% people were left there. They unleashed after the partition, They unleashed a genocide on the 23% of the non-Muslims there. Then they unleashed genocide on the Bengalis, both Hindus and Muslims. They unleashed a genocide even in Sindh, even in Balochistan. So to recognize that Pakistan was a genocidal state, a state created out of a genocide, and a state which would call itself the new Medina, which meant they wanted to export the experiment of Islam to the East, to the non-Muslim world, which meant a commitment to a genocide for more. So we had a genocide state created. And then the other state which was created was the state of India, which tried to ignore genocide, which tried to close the eyes to the genocide, which tried to distort the memory of the genocide, which tried to put the blame of genocide on the victims themselves. That was the reality of the state of India. So state of India was actually, Pakistan was a state of genocide. India was a state of denial of genocide. And it was based till since 47 to this time. Indian state has continued to be a state of denial of genocide. We try to presume that since the majority of people of India are Hindus and Hindus play a dominant role in forming the government, Indian state automatically will be in sync with the very basic survival needs of the Hindus. But the reality is different. From the inception 1947 till now, Indian state denied the genocide of Hindus. Indian political class denied the genocide of the Hindus. Why did they do it? They wanted to postpone the conclusion that just partition eventually did not solve the problem. In fact, it unleashed a war. It was the continuation of the same genocidal war which was happening for 1,000 years. So the biggest surprise is that the Hindus also started ignoring the genocide. We can say that before 47, the concepts of genocide, the comprehension about the nature of genocide, that perhaps was not understood by the people of India. But in 40, once the genocidal convention was accepted, prevention and punishment of the crime of genocide convention was adopted, in which the state of India played a pioneering role. And the same convention was ratified by the Parliament of India. After that, Indian state remaining neutral or even in the denial mode of genocide was one of the biggest crimes which was committed. And it continues to be like that till now. So the Hindus are facing two realities. One reality is the genocidal state of Pakistan, which continues to inflict genocide, because it has to create, it's the new Medina, it has to destroy India. India is the old Makkah, the idealist, the pluralist Makkah has to be destroyed. They are doing it. And on the other side, the state of India, which had to protect it, is denying it. You'll be surprised when the genocidal violence in Kashmir was unleashed against the Hindus. They were standing instructions to the people that you will never hand over this. When they were told, and the government of India was informed, that the people will be expelled, religious cleansing will take place. Still, the executive heads were told that you will not call the army, you will not invite them, we will tell you what has to be done. And when eventually the religious cleansing happened, do you know what happened? At the level of Congress, at the level of the non-BJP parties, they put the blame on unemployment, on rigged elections. What was happening in the Kashmir was misguided youth. So they concocted reasons which were not existing, which even the separatists, which even the political parties of the valley, mainstream political parties, were not accepting. Repeatedly, from National Conference to Hizbul Mujahideen, every leader has said over the years that ये सड़क बिजली पानी की लड़ाई नहीं. It's not the battle of development. It's not the alienation is not because of developmental deficit. We have an issue, and the issue is Islamic issue. It has to be settled. But Indian state concocted. Rigged election was concocted by the state of India. It was not concocted by the Muslims of Kashmir. Unemployment as a reason for unrest there was concocted by the state of India. When the percentage of, say, employed government employees, and the population was the highest in Kashmir. Government of India churned out this, the state of India churned out this rationalization. And they tried to create alibis for it, to fudge the genocide. And they called the religious cleansing as migration. You'll be surprised when Government of India submitted a memorandum to the International Council of Jurists during Narasimha Rao's period. They said it's a demographic assault which tantamounts almost to the religious cleansing. But when they submitted their own memorandum to the National Human Rights Commission, they said it is a self-imposed displacement. Now, it can be a very small empirical fact in front of us that we can ignore that it was a mistake. No, it's not a mistake. 3 million people died in 1947. How much has been written by Hindus on this subject? How many books have been written by Hindus? How many case studies have been collected by Hindus? We immediately closed our eyes. We became ostriched. We anesthetized ourselves. And we believed by anesthetizing ourselves, this war will go. It will not remain there. The war which did not go even for a moment after the invasions of the Islam started on India, invasions of Muslims started on India. That war did not go. It did not go in 47. It did not evaporate in 47. Then it emerged in 89-90 as the religious cleansing and genocide of the Hindus. If the state of India cannot prevent and reverse the genocide on its own soil, what value it has for the Hindus who are being subjected to genocide in Pakistan and Bangladesh? Hundreds of millions of people were killed or converted in those parts of India. You have a genocidal process in West Bengal taking place, which is called as political violence. The similar things will happen in Kerala. In fact, there are genocidal attritions all across India, which we deny. So the mute question is, why is Indian state ignoring the genocide? And why are the Hindus ignoring the genocide? Unless we face these two realities, unless we try to answer this question, we'll not be able to evolve the processes. We'll not be able to evolve the responses. Because if to such monumental tragedies, imagine 3 million people dying within a span of 6 months. Has it ever happened in the world? Let us say only 1 million people died. Has 1 million people died anywhere in the world during a span of 6 months? What does it mean in terms of intensity of violence? What does it mean in terms of the destruction, the expanse of destruction, and the expanse of ultimately the mutilation of the people within a small, short period of time? So, India is a hope, but this hope will materialize when India will stand up on its legs. And India cannot stand on its legs if it remains with its eyes closed, with its body desensitized. It will not be able to survive as a nation. I am not trying to sound as a pessimist. I am not. Indian civilization has survived 1,000 years when almost 3 civilizations perished. Within 100 years after Islam was declared as a creed, India has survived. There is a huge depth of our civilization. The layers of one layer fades away and another layer comes. That my confidence is there. But once we talk about meeting the challenge of this war, putting a halt to it, it's not a priority as it. It is not a priority for Indian state because it is the only state in the world which is at war with its own nation. I have told Sanjay ji many times that Pakistan is an abnormal nation with a normal state. India is a normal nation with an abnormal state. We have to correct it. How we correct it, that it depends upon how our mind works. But at the same time, the Hindus have to realize that there is a relentless, ruthless genocide war going against them for 1,000 years. To survive as a civilization, they have to put a halt to it. And to put a halt to it, they have to recognize it. What is happening is that right from RSS up to Congress, nobody recognizes it. And perhaps it's our responsibility to tell the Hindus of India that Indian state will not be in sync with your most egalitarian, forward-looking, humanitarian interests unless and until it does not put a halt and it does not reverse the genocide inflicted on the Hindus of India or being inflicted on the Hindus of India. If Indian state does not have this commitment, then Indian state will be a state of denial of genocide. And denial of genocide is the climax of genocide. Holocaust experts say that denial of genocide is hounding out the victim next time. It is a double killing. It is basically killing the victim again and again by distorting even the memory, destroying even the memory of the genocide, of their victimhood. So you have taken up an issue which is so sensitive, which is so fundamental and elemental, that in case we do not move through it, in case we do not go through this road, we will not be able to reclaim ultimately India as the India जिसको हम सदगुरु बोलते हैं कि what RSS people say परम वैभव वो कहाँ से आएगा? It will not come. It will not come through this route. We have to face the reality. There is Pakistan is a genocidal war committed to inflicting more genocides on India. And the Western culture, which has come out of the worst periods of humanitarian, what you call as assaults, which have come from the West, as imperialists, as colonialists, previously as theofascists. That West, which has now got the renaissance, that still is not sensitized. That is not sensitized to the worst type of tragedy which has been inflicted upon a civilization, which each creed which constituted the Western political culture at that point of time over the years wanted to destroy. India has been a prized catch. It has been a prized catch for them before, even before the First World War. They won the two world wars through the resources, human as well as material resources of India. So we have a challenge. We have a monumental challenge. Unless we address it, we will be by circumventing the issue, we will not be able to come out of it. I am hopeful because we have survived the worst type of assaults and we have come out of it. And the people who have unleashed assaults on us have disintegrated. That is my hope. But my caution is that the biggest enemy of victims is incomprehension. We are still in a state of incomprehension.
Very eloquently put. Vibhuti ji, the punchline, according to me, this narration of Dr. Chrungoo is that Pakistan is an abnormal nation with a normal state, and India is a normal nation with an abnormal state. So what do we do about it? Muted.
The doctor has analyzed the disease and also given the prescription. So I will just say that, we know the history now. We know what has happened. The question is, where do we go from here? So despite all the wisdom and the knowledge, we know for sure that we made a mistake. Hindus made a mistake by misapplying the interpretation of philosophies of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, Atitithi Devo Bhava. So when he says Pakistan is an abnormal state, an abnormal structure, abnormal this, I say it's abnormal in both respects. There's nothing normal about it. It's an abnormality of Pakistan that is the truth that is staring in our eyes. But we have to look at in our own Gireban mein jhakna padega na. So which was the government that was doing all that they did? No, Nehru and Indira Gandhi were Kashmiri pundits. And Indira Gandhi changed because of her marriage. But Nehru was a Kashmiri pundit. He misled his own people. Who do we blame? Right? And the Kashmiri pundits probably trusted him कि अपना बंदा है कुछ करेगा, ठीक करेगा. लेकिन the guy misled the whole country and its own people. We also know that the left is very smart. The left have perfected. They have mastered the art of deception and obfuscating history and hiding the truth. We had for 5 terms, we had 5 Muslim education ministers who completely changed the narrative, softened the impact. What are people going to do after the post-independence, post-independence fatigue, as I say? The point which I'm trying to make here is, where do we go from here? And where do we go from here is the key question. And unless and until we address that question, blaming Hindus for not being and not doing adequate is enough. Common man is always dependent on the leadership. Our leadership was distorted. And that's the reason why it has sucked into our system, body politic, in such a way that we live with a denial of a fact. And with due respect to it, Dr. Chrungoo, that we have survived thousands of years of onslaught. Yes, we have, indeed. But we are also being broken up. We have already surrendered 3 prime lands of our country to 3 Islamic republics. Afghanistan, महाभारत की कहानी चली गई वहां पे, गांधार पूरा चला गया उनको, Pakistan and Bangladesh chala gaya. So we are in the threat of balkanization. So think about it from that perspective, and that's what we have to think about, is that what do we do next? And that's the agenda that is key. That's the thing we must talk about. That if our genocidal stories are all driven by the United Nations Charter prescriptions, what are we doing about it? Why is the government not responding? What is the challenge that government is facing? I would expect and want Prime Minister Modi to say so, that these are the hurdles we are facing in the system. It has become a systemic problem for us. See, you have, if I know that smoking causes cancer, and if I still smoke, who do I blame? The cigarette company or the government that has not banned the cigarette, or myself? So it is a very interesting scenario that Indians are facing, that we have to contest, we have to confront, and we have to stand up to the misdeeds that have been brought about on our country, whether it was left domination or were Nehruvian dimension that caused all this damage. We have to uproot it. So cutting the branches of a tree doesn't solve the problem. You have to uproot it. We have to go to the root of it. And now we know the root. So let's kind of uproot the root itself and install new seed. And that's possible. It's happening. And I'm very happy about one thing, that in this country right now, India, there is a far greater awareness, much greater anxiety, much greater desire to do something. And there is a need for leadership, need for narrative. That's what we are doing here, we are no longer relying on so-called mainstream media who distorted the history. We know that. So we are now no longer watching them. There was a person who told me yesterday, oh, I have not watched NDTV for years. I have not watched the mainstream media for years. I'm relying on Jaipur dialogues for information and the honest truth. So congratulations to all of us here. We are doing something positive to inspire people. That's our goal here. And I'm all saying that everybody who is watching this show, pick one theme and do something about it. And if it is so, technology is a big enabler. Let's use it. Otherwise, हम सिर्फ चर्चा करते रहेंगे, बातें करते रहेंगे, हमारा इतिहास कितना glorious है, हम golden bird थे. Let's not go into denial. Let's face the facts, the truth that it is. And unless and until we do that, we will continue to have a conversation. विचार, विमर्श, विश्लेषण, विमोचन और विख्यान होता रहेगा. भगवत गीता का मूल मंत्र जो एक्शन का था वो हम भूल गए. तो हमें अब, वो कहते हैं ब्यूरोक्रेसी में बड़ा अच्छा शब्द है ना था, इस चीज को कार्यान्वित किया जाए. तो अब हमारे जो नैरेटिव है उसको कार्यान्वित किया जाए. And that's what I want to say, that in my work now in the last 30 years that I have been here, that's what I have been doing, is to change the narrative to the Western media and Western audience. Think about us from our perspective. And I'll give you one example. In one of the investment programs, many CEOs told me, your country is totally screwed up. You are a socialist country, corrupt bureaucracy, corrupt politicians, nothing happens there. Every Indian nods his head, shakes his head, but never commits to doing anything. And you are so backward. And I told him immediately thereafter, I said, look, you are looking at India from the prism of America of 2000. That's where you are making a mistake. Look at India from the prism of America post-Second World War. That's where India is today. If we were perfect, we won't need you. And then they said, oh, that makes a lot of sense. I said, that's where you have to come and take advantage of the opportunity. I'm talking about the same thing to every Indian here. You know now what is happening. Now do something about it. Seek out leadership. Question leadership. Ask leadership. If you do not create the demand, there will be no supply. A classic learning of economics demand and supply situation, right? So if I'm not suffering from heart attack or heart ailment, I won't go to a heart doctor, right? I won't go to a cardiologist. If I have a problem with ulcer, I'll go to a gastro guy. That's the point which I'm trying to say to you. Let's identify what ails us. What are we suffering from? And if we do not begin to take positive steps now onwards, then we will keep talking about it. And I want people to think, enough बातें बहुत हो गई, अब चलो कुछ काम भी करें. That's the point which I'm trying to drive at. And I totally say, I mean, I was in Delhi in 1990. Kashmiri exodus happened. I was in Srinagar when the first bullets were fired on that particular day. So I'm totally understanding of the situation. I can't ever feel the pain that Kashmiri Pandits have gone about. But I have interacted with them many. But despite all the wisdom, Saraswati ki peeth thi wo, Sharda peeth thi wo, what happened to our intellect and wisdom and knowledge that we did not do anything to protect and defend ourselves, our own dharma? भूल गए कि महाभारत और रामायण में भी युद्ध हुआ था और धर्म के लिए हमने शस्त्र उठाए थे. वो शस्त्र अब कब उठेगा? अगर आज भी ना उठा तो हम ऐसे ही बैठे डिनायल के मोड में रहेंगे. So that's where we have to get out of. Thank you very much.
Okay, so let me request all our audience, or the people, or the viewers watching, to please start asking your questions, because I am about to field last question of this to the panelists, and after that we will go to the audience questions. Dr. Chrungoo, my proposition, when I made the initial proposition, I also said that the Hindumisia, the Hindu hatred, which we find so pervasive in the West, is actually related to our own self-loathing or our own denial of genocide. If we had pitched this genocide strongly, then maybe the West would not have dared to hate us the way it does.
So, see, that's called the what you are saying is absolutely correct. That's called we have internalized the enemy. We have not externalized the enemy as yet. Internalization of enemy means that when you see all the faults in your own self, you think that what has happened to you was not as much a result of the external assault. It was more a result of our internal failings. In the light of monumental attacks on the humanity, genocidal attacks, if you call them, what happens when the enemy is very, very strong, and enemy is so strong that its reach is across the continents, and you suddenly start feeling that I'm very weak, I'm very small. At that time, an escape reaction takes control of the target nation or the target community, and the best way is to blame your own self. Having said that, that doesn't mean that we don't have to understand the internal shortcomings, but that certainly means that we have to externalize the enemy. What type of assault was happening on India? It was a totalitarian assault. What is a totalitarian assault? We talk about it, all of us know about jihad. And then we are caught up in the debate that jihad means internal jihad, basically, and it's a misinterpretation. The type of war which the Islam unleashed on the humanity, they call it a jihad. Let us say it is not. Let us for a moment accept that Quran does not condone it, or Quran does not reflect it. Even if that it is there, but ultimately those who waged this jihad, they were all Muslims. They were all quoting Quran. They were all quoting ultimately Muhammad. They were all taking inspiration from the life of Muhammad. We cannot ignore that fact. Now, what is this totalitarian war? This totalitarian war is where the jihadic totalitarian war is. I'll just give you an example. The concept of terror in jihad. What is the concept of terror in jihad? The best and the most unequivocal expression to this fact has been given by the Pakistani General Brigadier Malik. And he says Terror struck into the hearts of the enemy is not only a means, it is the end in itself. Once a condition of terror into the opponent's heart is obtained, hardly anything is left to be achieved. It is the point at which the means and the end meet and merge. Terror is a means of imposing decision upon the enemy. It is a decision we wish to impose upon him. Imagine how the enemy is thinking about what they are doing. This is what I mean is externalization. In jihad, there is no society. There is all society is paramilitary society. All the resources of the society are at the disposal of the religious war. In this, numbers are not counted. How many infidels are to be killed? Even if they are millions or billions, they have to be killed legitimately. We have to realize it. Then it's a war which is ultimately in wait for an apocalypse. कयामत का इंतजार है. कयामत के टाइम ही महदी भी आएगा. No, it's an apocalyptic war. How do we understand it? How do we realize it? How do we internalize this? They say, what is the difference between the totalitarian, say, communism or the communist wars and the Islamic totalitarian Islamist wars? About the communist war, they say, yes, it is also irrational ideology, driven by an irrational ideology, where the objective is a utopia of a classless society. And Islam is also driven by a utopia of creating an ummah or a Darul Islam, the entire world becoming Mu'min, accepting, ultimately believing in the same Allah. But then they say the difference here is that in the Islamist war, the methodology is irrational. They think of life after death. And whenever the communists were confronted between existence and their ideology, they chose existence. The Soviet Union was dissolved because Russia was almost getting finished. In fact, well before the Afghanistan war, and it is now being documented that the Russian president had mentioned this to the Americans that we want to withdraw from Afghanistan. Let us do it in a peaceful, in a way that it does not help the Islamists. The Americans took it that he was weak, and now this is the time that we have to press the button. And ultimately, the American experts themselves said it was the biggest mistake, and we got caught up. So, Soviet Union was dissolved to preserve Russia. The same thing happened in Berlin. The same thing happened in Cuba, where the choice was between, say, for example, preserving the ideology and preserving the existence. They many times took the decision of preserving the existence. But this is not the case with the Islam. This is not the case with the Islamic expansion or the Islamic regression. The targets are very regressive. Now, this has an implication, because if jihad is unfolding on India in the form of terror, then Hindus cannot escape understanding what type of terror it is. If we try to delay this understanding, we'll not be able to fight it. I have to say two more things just before I close. One thing is, I just want to bring it to your notice because it repeatedly comes. Just before independence in 1946 and even after independence in 1947, Kashmiri Pundit leadership of Valley meets Jawaharlal Nehru and tells him National Conference is an outrightly communal organization. It is not going to deliver the secular ends. And on both the occasions, Nehru tells them, you have to merge with National Conference, or you have to run away, or you have to get finished. There was an old Islamic slogan in Kashmir which was given against the Hindus of Kashmir. Relu, Ghaliu, Tselu. Relu means milna. You have to merge. You have to converge and merge. You have to accept. Ghaliu means finish. You just melt away. You just get finished. Tselu means you run away. This slogan, not in these words, was articulated to the Kashmiri Pandits by Nehru itself. This is a different subject. Did Kashmiri Pandits support Nehru in 47? I'll give you just one example because this is a subject which is coming again and again. Nehru had to write a letter to Sardar Patel, and it is mentioned in the letters. The letter is there, that he had to tell him that why don't you advise Kashmiri Pandits? They are opposing Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah and they are creating problems. So there is a lot of stereotypes which have been built over the period of time. Like a stereotype that Maharaja delayed accession because he wanted to preserve his kingdom. Nobody was ever told that Maharaja delayed, because even Congress top leadership was telling him that you delay it, because the fate of Junagadh, Hyderabad, and Bhopal was still hanging. They didn't want to take him a preemptive action which will force ultimately the other two states to accede to Pakistan. In fact, Maharaja was given this suggestion that you will be bartered away. Now, once I am trying to tell these things, here is a reality. Nehru lived in Allahabad for 200 years. He could not become an Allahabadi. And even after 200 years, he is still a Kashmiri Pandit. And Kashmiri Pandits have to still bear the cross of Nehru. When I say these things, I don't mean to say all Kashmiri Pandits are good. We were in an attrition zone. Maybe the compromisers was more. We were trying to survive living in an overwhelmingly Muslim society, living in a Muslim state. It's a different experience altogether. I'm not trying to condone anybody's sins, but because we are here, we are all people who love India, who love Hindus, who want to do something. We are here for trying to evolve at least a narrative which is going to deliver Hindus out of a morass after a long, long time. That's why I put it here. I am only trying to conclude myself that we have to understand what is the enemy, what is the type of terror which we are facing, what is the type of the war which we are facing. Jihad is a total war, and terror is just a small arm of it. We all know it, but we have to internalize it. We all know that Hindus were destroyed, but we have never internalized the fact that genocide has happened. We have to respond to genocide. From our morning prayer to our all ritual structure, the jihad, reversing this jihad and stopping this genocide, it has to be an objective. It has to come in our sankalp. It has to come in our prarthana. It is not. For 1000 years, we have to do it. Those are the basic preliminary psychological steps. And the decisive step is to recognize, so till the time Indian state is at war with its own civilization, it distorts its own civilization. Till the time we cannot bring it in harmony with the civilizational interests of India, we have a task cut out for us. Now, once I say, for example, if we agree on these propositions, then we have a very clear-cut task to tell to our political leaders whom we have been waiting, sometimes presuming that they are following the Hindu interests, sometimes seeing that after declaring that they will be following the Hindu interests, they are abandoning them. We have a very clear-cut, we'll be having a very clear-cut picture in front of us. Sometimes back, somebody said that the Hindus have to take a pledge that they will only vote for those who protect Hindu interests. Wonderful thing. It has to be done. Let us all take pledge. But people like us, people like Sanjay Dikshit, Mr. Jha, you have to create a framework. How will we assess whether a leader is pro-Hindu or not? There has to be a framework created ab initio at the very beginning before you unleash a political response to it. Is that how can we assess whether a person is pro-Hindu or not? A very scientific format has to be made. The format should be the way, say, the human rights behavior of countries or the leaders of the political parties is assessed in, say, United Nations. Say, for example, in America, Europe, to decide whether we have to give the aid or not, whether they can be the recipient of the legitimate aid or not. We have to create a format. And some people who are above party politics, they have to tell the people that assess them on these yardsticks. These preliminary, very, very preliminary, but basically fundamental psychological, responses to the situation can create the profound response in the ground. And I want to tell you, we have reached a stage where the political war against the Muslim communalism has to be won on the streets of India. We have reached that stage. That's why I many times say that we are at that stage where psychologically we are at that stage when Subhash Chandra Bose realized that Congress is an irrelevant instrument for the independence of India. Congress cannot deliver independence to India. It is intellectually, ideologically, or physically incapable of doing it. Hindus of India are face to face with this type of a moment. And we have to realize that the present dispensation, unless the target is very clear, the target is that if Indian state is neutral or hostile to the interests of Hindus, then we have to realize that it has to be brought on the track. It has to be transformed. And the most important thing which can happen is that Indian state ultimately owns its responsibility to stop and reverse the genocide being inflicted on Hindus in India and outside India. If Indian state avoids it, it cannot follow, it cannot uphold any interest of Hindus. And for that, it is very critical that the law, Indian state has ratified the Convention of the Prevention and the Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. Indian state has not, India has not as yet have a law. Perhaps, again, at an intellectual level, at a people's level, we have to say that let there be a law. Let the Indian Parliament, let the Constitution of India have an act now, which is clearly which addresses the crime of genocide, its punishment and its reversal in line with the Convention of the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide.
Okay, right. As usual, very eloquently put. I think this is the right time now to move to the questions and answers, and let me request all my viewers to please share this video, like it, also subscribe to the channel, press the bell icon, and also support us with your contributions. Questions, answers.
Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
Vivek Singh. So I touch your feet for your clarity in imparting that on us. Do you really think Hindus survived somehow 2000 years should be dependent upon political leaders or today's secular RSS version? Ajay ji.
See, I have repeatedly said that we are witnessing perhaps the fourth layer of the subversion, the deepest layer of subversion. That is, I have tried to put it that the RSS creed at the very top, not in its body, not downwards, at the very top is getting Abrahamized. RSS is gradually, you see, becoming secular in the sense that they believe in right to equality is one thing. Becoming secular in the Muslim sense and the Congress sense, even worse than that, is something very dangerous happening. And it has to be pinpointed because it is easy to push them back on this account at this time before the body gets infected. Saying that all people living in India are Hindus, saying that Hindus should stop worshipping the gods and goddesses and only worship Mother India, saying that Hindus should give up the ritualistic patterns of their worship. If you analyze them together, you will realize that these are very, very gradual, incremental steps towards Abrahamization. Because the moment you say all people living in India are Hindus, then you are reducing India to a geographical expression, which British wanted to do and which a large segment of Muslims also would say publicly, Muslim leadership. India is a civilizational entity and Hindu is a civilizational expression. It's not merely a geographical expression. Number one, the moment RSS consents to it, we have to understand what is the strategic logic, what is the tactical logic for it, or what is the philosophical logic for it. We cannot avoid this question. The second thing, can India be a Bharat Mata without the gods and goddesses? And are the gods and goddesses the cause of weakness of India and the division of India? The moment you make a proposition, you give vent to your psychological expressions, the psychological fears or even psychological assessment. That if we shift from the gods and goddesses and make Bharat Mata the only goddess, we feel perhaps this is the way. But shifting from the gods and goddesses, we forget that Bharat Mata is Bharat Mata because of the gods and goddesses, because of the culture, because of the civilization, because of the folklore, the entire lore of it. The moment you say that you expunge it out, it ceases to be Bharat Mata. The third thing is we have to realize not the accretions, not the superstructures on the ritual tradition, but the ritual as it was in its most aesthetic form. It was the best. It is the best recipe for preserving a civilization. The entire anthropological, the entire philosophical substratum will be lost if the rituals are lost. Now, doesn't anybody tell them why are you doing it? Who is teaching you? Who is guiding you? And last but not the least, they are dithering to understand jihad. They are dithering to comment on the jihadi war and the responses of Hindus to jihadi war. These things are there. We have to tell them. The best way for every intellectual or every sensible person to do a content analysis of two things: the Musharraf formula and the agenda of alliance. Agenda of alliance had an open support of RSS, and Musharraf formula had a tacit support of RSS. Do a content analysis, you will understand to which way the whole ideograph of RSS is going. At this juncture, I personally feel that the problem is not impossible. If somebody has put it in their minds, let us correct it. If somebody has somehow sold this option in the form of their own interest, we tell them it's not your interest. And if somebody is getting planted to betray the very cause, then we have to identify that force. This is a time when Abramization of RSS can be prevented. You see, we waited for 100 years. We didn't contest the Akali wave of Sikhism, which ultimately became the Khalistani wave of Sikhism. We allowed the British to fiddle with the entire lore of Sikh moment in Punjab. And by the time we realized that it has caused alienation, at that time we found that there was already a sect of Sikhs which was as fascistly committed to ultimately imposing their will. So we are at a very sensitive point with regard to RSS. This is the time every Swayam Sevak, old Swayam Sevak or a new Swayam Sevak, a Swayam Sevak who has a responsibility, they have to ask these questions. Normally, what is happening when you ask some RSS thinking person, he says, but there must be some reason, there must be some strategy. Do you think Mohan Bhagavat will think like that? Fine. If they have faith, I have no problem with that faith. But there is one thing which has to be told. We do not have a luxury of wishful thinking. We are face to face with the totalitarian war, which is gradually spilling over into the streets of India. We have seen the spillover of jihad from Kashmir into the rest of India. We are seeing the duplication of genocides. If this is happening, then we do not have the luxury of wishful thinking. Somebody has to tell Mohanji Bhagavat that we don't understand you. We don't agree with you. This is not the RSS which we knew. This is not what we were taught in the Shakas in our days when we were part of the Shakas. It has to be told.
Right.
It has to be told to the RSS General Secretary also. And if we do it now, I think there is a correction. There will be a correction.
Okay, let's move to the next question. There are a lot of questions, so I would request both these speakers to be a little brief. In past and present, there are forces in higher posts in India who will not allow any research, publication, studies on Hindu genocide in 1947 and 1971. Well, they still are. If you're thinking that there aren't any more, they very much are. So that's something that I can answer straight away off the cuff. Anything you want to add?
Now,
There have been some good books. There have been some good books also written in this whole inertia on partition. The Godbole's books on partition, it's a very, very sincere account. And let us start doing it. Nobody stops us from writing. There's a wonderful book which Sanjay has written on in the name of Unbreaking India. It's a very simple, straightforward, easily understood book. We have to do it. We have to start. If I cannot write, I have to start writing. Because if our academia, if our university systems have been taken over, then we have to create our own academic systems, starting with the individual and then creating bigger, wider processes. Rajiv Malhotra is one case in front of us. How much work he has done.
Thank you. Thank you for praising my effort, Ajay ji. Let's move to the next one. Jagdish ji, thank you. Prem Jyoti ji, India was a land of dharma, but Europeans reduced it to Hinduism, Islam, and we accepted it. Can you please explain why? Vibhuti ji, would you like to have a go at it?
Well, there is a very simple philosophy called divide and rule. And you don't need to have a long answer on that, Premji, because it is divide and rule. And it is, I think somebody told me about it, that in the partition document, it is mentioned that the British sowed the seeds of hatred between Hindus and Muslims to such an extent that they never come together. I mean, whatever the thing was, they were never together anyway, but they sowed the seeds. That we see that. So the question is very simple here. We know now what Pakistan does. Why aren't we doing what we must? And if I were the Prime Minister, if I was Prime Minister's advisor, I'd say break relationship with Pakistan. Let's see what the worst can happen out of that. Let's break every single political, cultural, Hollywood, Bollywood relationship with Pakistan. Damn it. Complete break. We may not have a choice of neighbor, but we have a choice of friend. And we don't consider you as friend because you do not consider us as friend. That's it.
Yes, but in my book, which Ajay Chrungoo ji referred, I have put the whole blame squarely on the shoulders of the great Mahatma.
Right.
He was the one who actually reversed the tide of the the Bengal movement, the Bengal unification movement, which defeated the British. That was the only time the British actually accepted defeat. And after that, that whole process was reversed.
Right.
So you have to take that also.
Absolutely.
Prem Jyoti, apart from being in threat of Islamic Jihad, Hinduism was also facing constant threat from imperialism of European ideas and values in our community. How can that be avoided? In fact, that is the whole basis of the discussion. He's saying that we have to get out of the denial. The moment we get out of the denial, we will be able to defeat those imperialism of ideas. We are ourselves in denial. Vidhi Sinha, thank you, Vidhi ji. Harish Pokhriyal, I watch Pakistani media, they do abuse RSS and you are too. Do you not think RSS aid in big problem? I don't understand the question actually. Is RSS is in big problem? Is that the question?
Perhaps it is. You know, वो धोबी का कुत्ता ना घर का ना घाट का वाला हाल है कि पाकिस्तानी भी ठोक रहे हैं और हम भी उनको मार रहे हैं. तो you know, like so the leadership has to become conscious of this fact that the people you are trying to please are not listening to you, and you are losing your own core base.
They are in a state of complete ideological confusion. I had a chat with what is the Muslim Rashtriya Manch recently. And I asked them a question which they didn't answer. And that was my first question. I said, well, your Sarasanga Chalak says that anybody born in this land is actually Hindu. So why do you require a Muslim Rashtriya Manch? You should be part of Vishwa Hindu Parishad instead.
Right.
Nobody is answering that. Next question. Sneha Sheshpadi, why Hindus never converted? POWs like Muslims did.
We don't have a
Veer Savarkar
conversion policy.
No, Veer Savarkar described it. He said Sadguna Vikriti. And it was only Veer Savarkar who could do it. And he made that charge of Sadguna Vikriti against no less than a person than Shivaji Maharaj himself. And why? He said that it was a mistake on his part to return Gohar Bano. You heard about that Gohar Bano thing? That the Subedar of Kalyan's daughter-in-law was brought to him, and he returned her with full respect and honors. So Veer Savarkar said that was Sadguna Vikriti. That's the term that is used. So Sadguna Vikriti has dogged us. The totalitarian war, the total war concept, we probably never understood. They were always, I think, secure in their belief that even if they lost, not much harm was going to come to them, except that some of them would be killed in the battle and some of them would be taken prisoners, but they would be let off.
Right.
Sometimes gift. Maharana Amir of Mewar, he had Muhammad Mahmud Khilji imprisoned in Chittor for 6 months, and then all of a sudden he let him go with gifts. So this Sadguna Vikriti happens because we haven't understood, we did not try to understand in the ancient times the nature of the enemy. That's my view. Sudhir Mishra, the major problem is that for Twitter, a cabinet law minister comes and warns and we the fool people after every evidence court needs 20 years for judgment. Okay, those are the problems of our democracy. That is understood. Yes, Sudhirji. So I think I take that as an observation and move on. Slayer, Pranam, Gurujano, Vijay sir. Vibhuti ji, your question. We would be grateful to you if you could get Tulsi Gabbard or any other congressman to raise the issue in the Congress about Hindu genocide going on in Bengal, abetted by both Modi and Mamata government and the judiciary watching as a mute spectator.
Getting Tulsi Gabbard, but you have to remember, Tulsi Gabbard is a very popular Congress lady. But the question that you are putting is that the genocide abetted by Modi and Mamata, do you think Tulsi Gabbard will support that move? But that becomes a political interference in another state. So what we have to do is to ask Prime Minister Modi and Mamata equally, unequivocally, that what's going on? Is Kashmir repeating itself in West Bengal? That's the kind of question we have to ask ourselves. Before we ask others to do something for us, let's begin to do things for ourselves. And that's the key point that we are talking about today. हमें ही अपने लिए कुछ करना पड़ेगा, दूसरों के आसरे कब तक जिएंगे? ब्रिटिश ने ये किया, उसने वो किया, हमने क्या किया? What are we doing? And that's my perpetual question to each one of you. What are we doing about it? Our enemy has come and done whatever they wanted to do. What did we do?
Next. Maddie, I was in a clubhouse debate. The moderator, a Kashmiri Muslim activist, said that terror has no religion. And the KPs endorsed this view. Why? Have they no memory at all? Why the denial? Is it because they weren't born then? Ajay ji, your question.
It must have been some KP there. I don't say that he must not have. But I have last time also told them that the victim collaborators collaborators in the societies which have suffered genocide. There might be victim collaborators here, victim collaborators there. So that's not something as an unusual phenomenon. It's something which normally happens, and in fact, genocidal perpetrators harness, mobilize, and patronize victim collaborators. It has happened in history. It has happened in Europe. It has happened everywhere. It might be happening amongst Kashmiri Pandits. I don't say that there might not be persons who would like to say that the genocide has not happened. I don't know who was the person there who said this. But at a theoretical level, even at a practical level, this is not something unusual. The victims are themselves harnessed to ultimately create the solutions which destroy them. Victims are themselves harnessed to endorse the solutions which destroy them. It has happened many times. It has happened in so many similar situations. And our friend, whatever experience he has, if he was a Kashmiri Pandit, then he must not be more than a victim collaborator. And about victim collaborator, I have said they have no value structures. They have lost all value structures.
They may not have a value structure, Ajay. One of the key things is that, and I also came to know of it, that one of the reasons why the genocidal issue was not taken seriously, because there were very vocal people within the Kashmiri Pandit community that they did not agree. And the unity of purpose was missed out, I would put it that way.
It doesn't happen.
I'm sorry. I totally agree with your victim collaboration theory. I totally agree with that. There are people who are for self-survival, they do some things. But
You see,
in a cohesive manner, there was India itself has not accepted the concept of genocide of Kashmiri Pandit. That's the
not
problem.
only Kashmiri Pandits, Hindus,
Hindus.
broadly Hindus.
Hindus, I mean, Bangladesh.
And I can tell you,
On the contrary,
I-
you have to admire grudgingly the guts of Pakistanis to have challenged Hindu American Foundation in America, who have put up on their website the Bangladesh genocide of Hindus. They have threatened them. Think about it. It's happening in a country like this in America, and there is going to be a major issue on that, and they are not going to backtrack. So let the battle brew. And if they are making the mistake, that may be the beginning of a good point for all of us. That at least, hey, sometimes we all make mistakes. Pakistan perhaps made the mistake there, and that will not be left aside.
I just want to say one sentence. I have been watching very keenly since last 3 decades the discourse and what is being said by Kashmiri Pandits on the issue of religious cleansing. A very small percentage. In fact, some of them living in America also. A very small percentage of small means a few. You can count them on fingers. But overall, the broader overwhelming consensus. You don't need a consensus for recognizing the crime of genocide. It's not based on consensus. But if we try to say that what is the understanding of the entire community which has been displaced, overwhelmingly, they know it's a genocide, and that has been their basic what you call is difference with government of India. That why government of India denied it.
Okay, next one. Slayer PP Guruji Vijay Sir. Vishal Sood is being incarcerated by Aussie police for standing up against Khalistani pimps since they have successfully found to milk the anti-India bias of Aussie media too. Are we going to see Khalistani vote banks in Australia too now?
This is a very sad development there. This is what is the atmosphere in the world right now. The left-driven agenda has somewhere along the line, the woke societies have got into an agenda. I mentioned earlier on that somewhere along the line, the leftists, the agitationists, the communists, they have mastered the art of deception. And they have captured that element of violence in them. So look at it from this perspective that everywhere, the violence makers are the people who are demanding unreasonable requests. So there is a process of law. And I was told this very clearly that we are the opponents of democracy, the jihadi element. They told me that we are going to exploit, abuse, and master every single concept that you are proud of. Your rule of law, right? Your blasphemy laws. We are going to attack you on every single thing that you are proud of. So, like they are now trying to do that, trap him into that situation. We do not know the entire case. But of course, the due process of law will follow. And I hope he gets out of it because, Khalistanis are the current levels as bad as the Pakistanis in terms of being anti-India. I dare say that.
Okay, next. Rishi ji, ST ji, VJ ji may be out of context. Question is, when Pak got divided on religious line, then why great Hindu Gatha of Marwar Johar was debunked and ridiculed in our own history books? Was Nehru that bloody fool? Well, if you're asking, if you want a direct answer, I would say yes.
Yes.
He was that bloody fool. He was not just a fool, he was strategically blind. And if you want more graphic descriptions, then you tune into my series on Nehru. It is called Blunder Boy Nehru. Series of 4 episodes. So I agree with you.
And when he says very clearly, when he says it that whether great Hindu Gatha was debunked and ridiculed in our history books, is because there were 5 education ministers post-independence who were all Muslims, and they changed the narrative.
It was their job to follow the great Muhammad Habib of the Aligarh School
Correct.
and Rushbrook Williams of the Allahabad School, starting in the 1920s. And these people were influenced, not only influenced, some of them were direct pupil or direct disciples of this man.
Correct.
And they just carried on from that. And Nehru was, he was the willing accomplice. In fact, Maulana Azad was forced to become education minister. He didn't ask for it. That's what the records say. So he was not just a bloody fool, he was a bloody diabolical fool. Gauri Dani, namaste sir. Thank you for bringing awareness about Hindu genocide despite state being in denial. What do you think is the reason that Indian state hasn't been able to raise issue against selective Hindu minority killings in Bangladesh and Pakistan in the UN? Well, we've been discussing, the whole episode has been about that, where leaders in the USA are talking about it. Vibhuti ji,
No,
you have any
you
explanation?
have made a very factual statement, Gauriji. It's a people. If we don't talk about it, others talk about it. Question answer being short, I will stay at that.
Next. Krishna Sundar, sir, I was curtailed by my cousin when I was trying to explain statistics of Hindu genocide in terms like kafir and jihad to her 15-year-old ABCD daughter. Okay, ABCD. American born, confused Daisy. Okay. My cousin says she's afraid that her daughter might be cancelled and cannot get a job in the future.
Yeah. It is true. It is true. It is happening here. The woke culture is so. They have implemented in the US military. As a former military guy, there is a senator here who has said that the wokeism and critical race theory, the way it is being taught in America, is worse in army than he thought when he began to investigate. Yesterday, I saw a remarkable interview in which a North Korean asylum seeker who is studied in Columbia University, she said that the way we were taught about America and other countries of the world is exactly what Columbia is teaching its students. I feel I'm in a worse situation than I was in Korea. Think about it. And this is truly remarkable. That's what I said, Sanjay ji, the Indian parents should not spend $63,000 a year to send their children to liberal arts school, maybe a good career here, but they are going to be brainwashed.
Agastya Gurukulam is a far better option.
Right. He's right. Krishna Sundar is absolutely right about that. The fear is the fact that you have said something sometime and your views matter. They are also trying to do away with nomenclatures of vacations here. They are just going to talk it off day. Christmas will not be Christmas holiday, it will be off day.
And what about the birthing person? Mayank Trivedi is discussing the 1989-90 genocide considered taboo among KPs. Do KPs avoid talking about this topic amongst themselves? Unlike 6 on 1984, most KPs don't seem as vocal on 1990. Ajay ji.
I don't know how he has come to this conclusion. Kashmiri Hindus have been very, very vocal. I'm here in front of you. In fact, I have been one of the main advocates of this whole process for the last 3 decades. He needs to know a little bit of the Pan Kashmir movement for the last 3 decades. So fine, it's being done. It is being done it's very, very manifest on the social media. Otherwise also. So I don't think the information or the understanding is based on the facts.
Next. Pram, should we not settle down pundits in Jammu and transfer Muslims from Jammu to Kashmir instead of playing with the failed secular policy? I think Panun Kashmir has a policy on it, so Ajay Chrungoo might like to explain it.
So it has been we say that Hindus which have been displaced in 89 and before that from Kashmir have to be settled. In Kashmir, we have to create union territory within Kashmir, north and east of River Jhelum, and settle them in an area which is strategically vital. And initiate a process of reversing the this demographic changes. It has to be done. It can be started making the Kashmiri Hindu population as the nucleus, and then thinking of bringing bringing the Hindus from rest of the, creating incentives for bringing them from rest of India to Kashmir. In fact, the solution process will be reorganizing J&K Union Territory again, dividing Kashmir, and creating a very viable, vibrant, what you call as Jammu, where Hindus are not hostages or subject people. They are the people who can ultimately rise up and contribute to the progress of the nation. But creating a union territory for Hindus of Kashmir in Kashmir itself is a critical necessity, strategic necessity. Kashmir has to be divided again.
Okay. Next. Prem Jyoti, isn't constant state of denial Hindu genocide in West Bengal by Mamata Banerjee and utter cowardice shown by BJP, forcing the Hindus to pick up arms against the other community? What's bad in that? I wish they did that. But by all accounts, that doesn't seem to be happening, at least as yet. Next. Thank you, SDG. My question on Nehru was the last nail because I placed 50 copies of your book on Unbreaking India on occasion 21st June to give out to my fellow thinkers. Wow, Rishiji, that's a bonanza. Thank you. Tech ops, should you play to opposition strengths or your strengths? What is the best strategy? When Hinduism was not a religion, it became so to counter the Abrahamic religions. Not quite right. What would have happened if it remained the way it was, the way of life, and countered them? Similarly, Hinduism's strength is a decentralized approach. Is it a good approach to try and centralize it? I think there are some fundamental misunderstandings. I think Ajay would be the best person to counter this.
I don't. I think that the bigger challenge at this time, and I think it's already happening. I think it's already happening at a very all India basis, and Jaipur dialogues is one of the most potent expressions of it. Comprehending the problem is very critical, and Hindus have started comprehending the problem. They are now easily transgressing the boundaries which have been set up by their adversaries, political or cultural adversaries, to discuss their issues. Those boundaries have been already transgressed, and that is the best thing which has happened. And I think the information about Islamic conquests, even the imperialist conquests of this country, now is far more than it was at any point of time. When I see myself in 90, I think I know far more about the Islamic conquest now than I knew it in 1990. And it is happening at a very, very wider level. And this appreciation is very critical. And that's why this is the right time to understand that we have shifted. In 1947, we basically shifted from a state of colonialism to a state of auto-colonialism. A sort of a system was created through the political class, which was primarily at that time the Congress, where the people of India will become voluntary slaves of the imperialist interests. So that thing is getting reversed. Now, in India, there is no monologue, and Hindu assertion or Hindu, what you call as argument, is gradually making its impact felt. And that is the best development which is happening. And now we have reached a stage where even Modi is being asked very straight questions, where RSS are being asked very straight questions. This is a very, very fundamental change in the discourse, a very positive change in the discourse in India. So it is going to certainly lead to some very, very positive results in the coming days.
Next. Puneet Sharma, so if BJP is not supporting the major issues of Hindu issues, then which party should we support instead of BJP? As 7 years have passed, BJP rule, what improvement in their ruling we expect? Which party is there to support any Hindu issues? VHP. I think why should you be so pessimistic? Why don't you try and change BJP itself?
I think
That's what I would do.
it's important to you are very right. People must demand of BJP, and if BJP doesn't do it, there is no other party who will do anything. So Hindus must need to have some patience and faith, and you have to remember one thing very clearly, that it is not easy to undo 60 years of abuse. And we did a full show on 7 years of Modi government achievements. So there are quite a few positives on the asset side, and the narrative part is the one where they need to be stronger. And I think Prime Minister is definitely clued onto that, although his current actions, some of them have been absolutely stunningly flabbergasting, if I may use both the words together. It doesn't make sense for him to be as quiet as is. And I said at one point in time, silence is golden, it's also the virtue of the fool. So, we have to apply it judiciously. And when the action needs to be communicated, communication is the key. So, it's important.
Okay, next. Vijay sir, why hasn't vote bank politics got ingrained in US politics with so many diverse groups around? Although now Ilhan Omar and Cortez like are fast spreading the hate with their perfidious ideology.
But vote bank politics has always been the process in democracy everywhere, and it has been in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party as well. They cater to both the parties. That since it is a two-party system, they both have their core supporters. And then when it comes to the general election, then the middle is sought after on issue-based. So it is going on. I mean, what do you think? Immigration is happening at the rate at which it is happening, is securing the vote bank of Latinos. That is the vote bank politics being played here. Democrats are using the emotional plea. They are the party of unfettered immigration, and we'll do things for you for free. Somebody has to pay for it. So the great American dream that people talk about is Republican dream, actually. It's not a Democratic Party dream. They want you to be dependent on them for their gifts and largesses and the benefits. They want you to be dependent on the government. It's the Republican Party that says, go ahead, work hard, make your living, make your life as you wish to be doing it in America. Yeah.
Okay, the United States of Socialist America, that's what they say. Okay, Slayer, Vijay sir, Joe has declared that domestic terrorism is graver danger than Islamic terrorism. Okay, shades of Rahul Gandhi. Is Joe now officially the flag bearer of wokeism in US? Yes, he is the.
The answer is yes. You are right about that.
He's the seeding person of what's his name? His son's name?
Hunter.
Hunter. So he's the seeding person of Hunter. So Vijay sir, is it true, Pratik, that reps are planning to RIP Ilhan Omar and take away powers from House Committee of Religious Freedom? And thoughts on Putin Biden meet? So two questions.
This is not a conversation for this particular discussion today, but just to quickly say this, RIP doesn't stand here for rest in peace. It is actually to rip her apart. So she compared America with Hamas and terrorism, and that's where she has crossed the line. What does the Democratic Party do about her will be a very, very important element going for 2022 elections, which are just next year. So the heavy calculations are going on from that point of view, that these ladies have really taken things to another extreme in US. So much so that Tlaib, another congresswoman, berated her Congress party, her Democratic Party, by saying that this is anti-Islamic and anti-Muslim not to allow us to speak our mind. Think about it.
Okay. Rishi, Shungruji, I was 10-year-old when the first bullet was shot in Habakadal during Janmashtami. I still have that bullet mark in my feet, but I believe Modi ji will heal that wound.
Fine. We have to be hopeful. Let's all hope that Modi ji really changes. And we are not Modi ji's enemies. We are not his sycophants. We are trying to pinpoint certain fundamental issues, things to him, with the hope that he would change. And let's hope that he changes.
Yes, because not many people would otherwise tell him. Mayank Trivedi, great panel. Sanjay sir, it's a pleasure to watch the three of you together. Big fan of both Chrungoo sir and Vibhuti sir. Thank you, Mayank ji.
Thank you.
Next. Tarun, why is a lot of new age Kashmiri Hindu youth who settled in different states during the exodus not recognizing the genocide? They go gaga over Hindu Muslim bhai bhai. Shouldn't they recognize their own genocide? We have answered this question already, both from Vibhuti ji and from Ajay ji. I think anything a short answer you could supplement with, Ajay ji?
It's not correct. I have been working. It's not a correct assessment. I do not say that you might not have met one such person here and there, but it's not a correct assessment.
Next. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this session. Wonderful session, as always. And with two luminaries and Vibhuti ji and Ajay ji being here, it couldn't have been otherwise. So thank you very much to both of you, Dr. Ajay Chrungoo, Sri Vibhuti Jha, and all the viewers. Thank you. Jai Hind, Vande Mataram.
Jai
Jai Hind, Vande Mataram.
Vande Mataram.